My big brother, who was 10 years older, was a tuba player, and he used to keep his sousaphone in his bedroom. And one of my earliest musical memories was sneaking into his bedroom, crawling up inside this sousaphone, which, of course, you kind of wear. It wraps all around you, and blowing into that mouthpiece as hard as I could. And I just loved the big, loud, deep sound that it made.
From NCPR, North Country Public Radio, this is Northwards, introducing you to people you should meet, things you should know about, and voices you should hear from Northern New York, Vermont, Ontario, Quebec, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from Joe Steiniger and Mary McDonald, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
There's a 1962 episode of The Andy Griffith Show that drives my wife absolutely crazy. Not the plot. The plot is actually pretty funny, as it involves Don Knotts' Barney Fife character claiming he's a good singer so that he can join the Mayberry Town Choir, but he's actually terrible. The part that drives my wife absolutely nuts is the acting by a guy named Olan Sewell. He plays the choir's conductor. Specifically, she complains about how horrible he looks as he waves his hands from the lectern to conduct the choir. My wife has been a viola player for almost her entire life, and she's played for more than a few conductors over time, and so I will take her word for it that this may not have been the high water mark for the late actor Olan Sewell. The reason I'm telling this story at all is that we all have an impression of what a conductor does when he or she is on stage. But to me, the most impressive part of the conductor's work, whether it's with an orchestra, a choir, a concert band, is the ability to take a group of musicians who have different skill sets and different instruments or vocal qualities and get the most out of them to perform music that might be 300 years old, or it might be a brand new composition. For Michael Colburn, add to it the fact that the orchestra is brand new to him. Colburn is the new music director of the Orchestra of Northern New York, ONNY, becoming only the second permanent conductor in the Potsdam-based group's 36-year history. He grew up in Vermont, he lives in North Hero today, but in between, traveled the world first as a member and then director of the President's Own, the Marine band that's based at the White House. I had a chance to catch up with him as he prepared to conduct a series of Independence Week concerts with ONNY. Mike Colburn, thank you so much for taking some time out.
Oh, thank you, Mitch. I'm excited to be here.
What are the acoustics like at the White House?
They're quite good, although I will have to say when you ask a question like that, when the Marine Band, which was my former outfit, plays at the White House, we can play in a wide variety of settings. So with our chamber orchestra, which is the primary group that plays at the White House, we generally play in the Grand Foyer, which is this marbled room that often shows up, on television shows and in movies. And the acoustics in there are wonderful, very reverberant, and especially for a small chamber orchestra, they're just wonderful. But many of our events are outside, South Lawn, North Portico. It just really depends on the nature of the event.
Well, right. I was thinking these are, you and the others who are a part of these ensembles are professional musicians who, may be used to playing in concert halls and places with really finely tuned acoustics. And you have to be really versatile and, adaptable to play in all these places.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is one of the hallmarks of being a member of the President's Own is making sure that you can sound your best whatever the setting is. And, that setting, as I said, can be something quite, glamorous and elegant like the White House. But it can also be in an outdoor venue. We do many events at the Arlington National Cemetery, whether that is a full honors funeral for a fallen Marine or for Veterans Day events in the amphitheater, and often in circumstances that are less than ideal, freezing or sub-freezing temperatures. We don't expose our string players to those kind of settings, but for our wind, brass, and percussion, they're often in very difficult and challenging circumstances. And as much as I admire how great the Marine Band can sound on, say, the stage at Carnegie Hall, the way they can sound in, sub-freezing conditions for a presidential inauguration makes me respect them even more.
Wow. I don't want to spend the whole interview talking about the Marine Band, but I think most of us probably have the image, the audio image, I guess, of the Marine Band playing "Hail to the Chief" as the president enters a room. But I would think there's a lot more to it, or you wouldn't have done it for 20 plus years. What's the appeal to playing in a setting like that for you?
Sure. So it certainly often begins with something like Four Ruffles and Flourishes and Hail to the Chief, but the demands on the organization are much more involved with that. And while I was serving as director, one of my titles was music advisor to the White House. And so what that meant was when the social secretary, who plans all those big events at the White House, has a question about music, she would often call the director of the Marine Band. And I would encourage him or her, whoever was in the position at the time, to always ask us first. And we got many unusual requests. We got requests for an Irish ensemble for St. Patrick's Day, for a Cinco de Mayo ensemble, Latin American ensemble, Mexican music. We once got a request for a klezmer ensemble for a Hanukkah event. And fortunately for us, we had a clarinet quartet that had just done a recital of klezmer music. So we were able to send them over to the White House to satisfy the needs. So I would always encourage the social secretary to ask us first. And if we can do it, we will do that. But if we can't, we'll be honest about that as well. I remember one time she asked if we could provide a bagpipe band. And I said, okay, you got me there. We can't provide a bagpipe band, but most other things we can take care of.
So the band itself is made up of, I don't know how many people, but within that you can essentially pick and choose what you need for the occasion that it calls for.
Right. So there are 154 members of the President's Own. Of that number, about 130 are performing musicians. The remainder are administrative and support personnel. And in that group, we've got wind, brass, and percussion, as you might imagine. We have 18 string players that comprise that chamber orchestra that I mentioned that plays at the White House. And then we also have a small contingent of pianists and bass players who are versatile in both classical and jazz. And so with that makeup, we can really mix and match those musicians in a wide variety of ways, and often taking advantage of secondary talents that some of our musicians have. For example, we have a country ensemble that for many years our lead singer was one of our French horn players. And if we ever advertised for a French horn player that could sing country western music, we'd be hard-pressed to find somebody to fill that slot. But we just happened to have a horn player who had this secondary talent, and she loved to share it whenever she could. So we often took advantage of those secondary talents, and again, the very generous nature of those musicians to share those talents.
You were also a euphonium player, if I'm not mistaken. Did you have a secondary talent that people might not be aware of?
Well, my secondary talent was conducting, actually. So I joined the band in 1987 as a euphonium player. That was really my lifelong dream and goal, was to play the euphonium professionally. And in this country, the best professional jobs are the military bands. And of course, our premier military bands based in Washington, D.C. are kind of at the top of the heap there, And in fact, the very first professional euphonium player I ever met was when I was in junior high at a summer brass camp at the University of Vermont. I'm originally from Vermont. And he was the principal euphonium player in the Marine Band. And this was the first time I'd ever met a professional euphonium player. Didn't even know such a thing existed at that age. And that's really where the seed was planted that maybe I could do this someday for a living. And so when I decided to aspire for that, I started going to school here at the Crane School of Music in Potsdam, so my connections to Potsdam go way back. Actually to Crane Youth Music before I came to Crane as an undergrad. But then I transferred to Arizona State University to study with a tuba and euphonium teacher out there who is highly renowned. And he really equipped me with the skills that I needed to be competitive for one of those openings. But I was out there, I studied with him for a few years, just waiting for an audition, which is the lifestyle of those who are pursuing a life in professional music, is just waiting for that opportunity. And eventually an opening came up, and it happened to be for the President's Own. It happened to be for this band, whose principal euphonium I'd met so many years earlier. And I was fortunate enough to win a position with the band as a player. And that, like I said, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. That was my dream. And after I joined the band, I started working on a master's degree in conducting, not because I had any aspirations to conduct in the Marine Band, but because I thought if I'm ever looking for a college teaching position, I need some other skills. You talked about secondary skills. So I thought, being a conductor would be a good secondary skill for me. But in the course of getting that master's degree, I did some conducting on a chamber music series that we have in the Marine Band. And one of our assistant directors at the time had seen me conduct a few times and pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we've been watching you conduct, and we're kind of interested in what we're seeing. Have you ever thought about doing that here?" And you could have knocked me over with a feather, because I did not consider myself to be a conductor. I thought I'm a euphonium player. But I gave it a lot of thought, and the chance to not only become a conductor with this organization, but to become a leader in the organization was just too great an opportunity for me to pass up. I'd really grown to care deeply about the organization, and the chance to become part of the leadership was really, really exciting. And so I traded in my euphonium for a baton and never looked back.
To go back to those early days, what attracted you to the euphonium in the first place?
Well, my dad was a high school band director in northern Vermont, also directed the Army National Guard band based in Burlington. And so I grew up around music. My big brother, who was 10 years older, was a tuba player. And he used to keep his sousaphone in his bedroom. And one of my earliest musical memories was sneaking into his bedroom, crawling up inside this sousaphone, which of course you kind of wear, it wraps all around you, and blowing into that mouthpiece as hard as I could. And I just loved the big, loud, deep sound that it made. And so I wanted to play tuba. But I started playing in fifth grade, and my dad said, "You know, you're not that big. You don't want to be lugging a tuba around. Why don't you start with the baritone horn, which is another name for the euphonium, which is like a small tuba. In fact, it's called a tenor tuba in some countries." He said, "You can start on the baritone, and then when you get a little bit bigger, then you can switch to the tuba." And I was very lucky that my first middle school band director was a low brass specialist. And so I learned how to play not only baritone, but I did pick up trombone and tuba as well during junior high. But there was something about the baritone, about the euphonium, that I just loved. I loved the warmth of the tone that it produced. I love the fact that it was a little exotic. Not everybody knows what a euphonium is. And it gets really good parts, especially in older band music. A lot of melodies and really technically demanding parts. And so put that all together, and I just thought, I'm born to play the euphonium.
It is not a dream that you just don't hear a lot about people who, from such an early age know this is the thing that I want to play and that I want to spend my life with. But you have really, it has been a part of your life for decades now.
Yeah, I tell people, the euphonium was my first musical love. And it's not like I decided on the spot that I met that principal euphonium player that I wanted to do it. But that's where the seed was planted. And as I made my way through high school and realized, I love playing basketball, but I realized I wasn't going to make it past 6 feet. So a career in the NBA probably wasn't in my future. I had other interests as well, but there was something about music that just always felt like it was calling to me, as corny as that sounds. And the fact that, there are so many different careers in music that are a little unconventional, that have a lot of variety and challenge built into them. I thought, I didn't know that I was going to make it as a professional performer, but I thought, I know that I want a career in music, whether that's as a teacher or as a performer.
So 20 years with the President's Own. Another most of a decade at Butler University, if I'm not mistaken. These are some pretty dynamic assignments you've had in your life. What was it that encouraged you to come back to this part of the world?
So actually, it was 27 years in D.C.
Oh my gosh!
And then 8 years in Indianapolis. And so when you factor in that I, left for school in Arizona several years before that, it was almost 40 years that I'd been away from Vermont. And my wife is also from Vermont, from St. Albans. In fact, we met in my dad's high school band way back when. And as much as we loved the opportunity to have a life in Washington, D.C. and be part of that Marine band, family and culture, and the 8 years that we spent in Indianapolis, which were also very rewarding. We've got two sons who both went to school at Butler University, so we absolutely loved that chapter as well. None of those places were Vermont. And every time we came home, she spent a lot of time during the summers with our kids growing up, in Vermont. And of course, we have a lot of family and friends still there. It was calling to us, And so as much as I love my experience at Butler, we just got to a point where we thought, if we want to enjoy some time in Vermont, we need to move there sooner rather than later. And so we made that decision in 2022. A lot of people assumed that I was retiring because I was moving to Vermont, but I hasten to remind them I never said I was retiring. I just said I wanted to move to Vermont, but not looking for another full-time job. And so hoping for some good musical opportunities, which is why I was just thrilled when I found out that ONNY was looking for a new music director. And even more thrilled that they were interested in somebody with my kind of background, because a lot of people hear about my time with the Marine Band and they just assume, oh, he's a band director. But they don't realize that we have a chamber orchestra, so about a third of my conducting was actually with orchestra. So I had quite a bit of experience with that kind of repertoire and working with string players as well as wind brass and percussion. And so I was really happy that ONNY thought, yeah, let's see what this guy can do, and invited me to come in to audition in October. Had a great experience working with the musicians and getting to know the patrons of ONNY, as well as just having the opportunity to make music here in the North Country after having been away for so many years. And then even more thrilled when they invited me to become the second director in their history.
What do you see as the challenges in taking over an organization like this that has only had one musical director in its long history?
Yeah, so, first I tip my hat to Ken Andrews, who conceived of ONNY, and it was a labor of love for him, which he did mostly by himself at first. Of course, now has a great staff. And I stand in admiration for what he created here, with that organization. And it is a little daunting to only be the second person, in that position. But, I reflect back on my time in the Marine Band and remind myself that I held a position there as director that was once occupied by John Philip Sousa. So if you think too much time about the predecessors, you can kind of psych yourself out. So as I did with the Marine Band here with ONNY, I'm just hoping to put my own stamp on the organization, to lead those musicians to the best of my ability, to increase our footprint here in the North Country, and to make as many people in this area aware of the great treasure they have in the Orchestra of Northern New York.
Well, and there is a significant kind of public relations and fundraising aspect to what the musical director of ONNY has to do. I don't know that it's versus what the director of the President's Own, but there's the Marine Band comes with a certain amount of visibility already that I don't know is necessarily there when you go to every community in the North Country.
Sure, and you're absolutely right. When I took over the Marine Band, it was already pretty well known, and those musicians were already playing really well. So it was really just, I joke about the fact that I just felt like, okay, my most important job is to not screw this up, right? But even with the Marine Band, there is always the opportunity to increase our impact, to increase our visibility. While I was director of the band, I expanded our educational outreach, tried to make sure we were looking for every opportunity to perform for the taxpayers who were really responsible for the funding of our organization. So I felt like while I wasn't fundraising in particular, I was responsible for making sure that people felt like we were in a good investment. And that was both our public citizens as well as the leadership of the Marine Corps. When I went to Butler University, it was a very different kind of situation. I was walking into a situation there that the band program there was very storied and very successful, but their numbers had dropped off a little bit, and they were looking to kind of rebuild that program. So they hired me specifically for recruiting and expanding that program. And so I was very eager to see if I could do that, because, as I said, that wasn't something I had to worry about with the Marine Band. I didn't have to really build something. It was just a matter of expanding something that was always already very successful. So I was very pleased to see that, I enjoyed working with students at Butler University. It was music making on a slightly different level than working with professionals, but a level that was every bit as gratifying. And then the chance to expand that program. When I arrived, we had one wind ensemble. Within a couple of years, we had built our numbers up so that we had two ensembles, and we're really able to elevate the accomplishments of that first ensemble and expand our audience base quite a bit as well. So our audience numbers increased rather dramatically during the time that I was there. So I think our challenges here in ONNY are kind of similar to what I faced both in the Marine Band and at Butler University, in a slightly different format. There certainly was fundraising involved when I was at Butler, but slightly different set of pressures than an organization like ONNY faces. But I'm really eager to kind of throw myself into this new set of challenges in my professional life. In one way or another, I've kind of found myself in a new job every decade or so, and that has kept things really interesting and exciting. And so I'm really looking forward to embracing the challenges of this position. What
is the process of getting to know an orchestra like?
Well, musicians are musicians. And this is something that I find really enjoyable. I spent 27 years working with professional musicians in the Marine Band. And then, as I said, I went to Butler University where I was working primarily with students. But I found that the kind of the interpersonal dynamics of that ensemble were very similar to what I dealt with professionals in the Marine Band. And working with the musicians here at ONNY, it reminds me much of my Marine Band days, where we put together a concert in just a few rehearsals. So we've got 2 to 3 rehearsals to put together a full concert, and we want to make sure we, of course, represent ourselves well. And so rehearsals need to be very efficient, need to make sure that we accomplish as much as we can in the short time that we have together. And that's one of the areas in which I've always received kind of positive feedback is the efficiency of my rehearsals. And I think that was born of all those years of working with a Marine Band and needing to make sure that I was using that time as effectively as possible. So I'm really grateful for the fact that the musicians of ONNY appreciate how efficient our rehearsals have been together. And watching how they interact with each other and interact with the conductor feels very, very familiar to me. It's kind of a universal thing.
For people who don't appreciate how the position of conductor works at an organization like ONNY, it is not a full-time position. You're not, you don't report to the ONNY office or the studios or the practice rooms every day of the year. How do you go about, designing a season, scheduling performances and rehearsals in a way when you have to bring musicians in from a myriad of places?
Well, this is where, I turn to our executive director, Kathy Deljudas, who's been doing this job for many, many years, for her wisdom and advice. That's an area, of course, that is very unfamiliar to me. I'm really good at planning concerts and organizing rehearsals and taking care of the musical side of things. But when it comes to the logistics and the management of the personnel, we've also got a great personnel director in Jill Rubio who handles the contracting and finding all these musicians. Some of our musicians are local, but some travel from some distance away, so they need housing. There are all sorts of complications and levels of planning that, frankly, just amaze me. And I stand in admiration of Kathy and Jill for the work that they're doing on their side of the equation. And then that enables me to kind of really focus on the music. There's nothing that I enjoy more than programming, putting together a program that is going to be challenging and rewarding for the musicians, but also enjoyable and appealing to audiences. And there are some conductors, especially in some educational settings, who I think almost feel like those are mutually exclusive objectives, and I really don't think they are. I think it's actually quite easy to put together a program that's appealing to both the players and the audiences, because I've always felt that good music is good music. I think it was Duke Ellington once who said, "If it sounds good, it is good." And one of the things I loved about the Marine Band was that we programmed across such a wide variety of genres and styles, depending on the nature of our event. Sometimes that would be a very kind of traditional classical music presentation, whether that's by our concert band or our orchestra. But other times we're providing musical support, especially, say for an inauguration for a pop artist or a jazz artist. The chances that I had to work with musicians like John Williams and Yo-Yo Ma were fantastic, but I've got to say it was exciting also to work with Beyoncé and Kelly Clarkson and Aretha Franklin, and just, great legendary artists with very different, backgrounds and styles. And so I think you'll find in the Marine Band there are no musical snobs. We love all styles of music, and that really informs my programming now. Again, if it sounds good, it is good, and it's just a matter and really, it's kind of our responsibility as the performers to present it as well as we can.
You brought her up. Let me ask a dumb question. When you're working with Beyoncé, how much direction is Beyoncé taking from you, and how much direction are you taking from Beyoncé?
So when we worked with Beyoncé, it was for President Obama's second inauguration, and she was performing the national anthem and specifically was requested by President Obama to be accompanied by the Marine Band. And so we worked with her and her music director for several months. Our chief arranger, who is now actually the director of the Marine Band, Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Nowlin, who was then our chief arranger, had the task of creating an arrangement for Beyoncé. And so he worked closely with her music director. He did some listening to performances that she had done. She had done the anthem at the Super Bowl, I think, several years earlier. And so he kind of listened to that and got some ideas and put together an arrangement that she liked and was acceptable to her. And then the Marine Band, of course, prepared that arrangement arrangement as well. As far as direction, I'm not going to offer too much direction to a professional artist who comes in to work with us. I'm just going to make sure that we are supporting them and making sure that they feel like they have what they need to sound their best. That's always our goal as the Marine Band, especially when we're dealing with someone who's been invited by the president, someone who's performing at the White House. We want to make sure they are as comfortable and feeling as supported as possible so that they can perform at their absolute best.
It's amazing to think that just a song like the national anthem, which is so well known and an existing song, that it would be a process of a couple of months to get the arrangement just right.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who has watched the performance of the national anthem in settings, especially like sporting events, especially with high-level artists, knows that many artists like to kind of put their own stamp on the anthem. And I would often get questions from people, often questions with a hint of criticism that, so what do you think about this arrangement of the anthem or that arrangement of the anthem? Especially because I represent such a traditional organization in the Marine Band. And I will say that my preference for the national anthem is the very straightforward version that we have that was authorized by the Department of Defense that we perform with the Marine Band that is really quite stunning and quite moving. That said, I don't object to more creative arrangements as long as they're done out of love and respect for our country. And it was very clear to me in Beyoncé's performance of the anthem that the anthem meant every bit as much to her as it did to me and to those of us in the Marine Band. And so I thought that was a beautiful arrangement, and she performed it stunningly.
What do you miss most about your time with the President's Own?
Well, I miss the people that I worked with. The level of musicianship is just stunning in that organization. But what to me is even more remarkable is the lack of ego. I mean, there's an understanding when you become a member of the President's Own. You've got to understand these are all people who were soloists and first chair players in bands and orchestras as they were, studying and gaining professional experience before coming to the Marine Band. And suddenly they're in with a group of peers, people who are every bit as talented as they are. And so the understanding that, we all need to acquiesce to the collective goal of sounding as good as we can sound as an ensemble is the absolute top priority. And of course, that really mirrors the sense of esprit de corps that is typical of the Marine Corps, right? It's what the Marine Corps expects of all of its Marines, and its musicians are no different. And I think what surprises a lot of our musicians is that, many of them come into the Marine Band as I did as civilians and really just with the aspiration to perform professionally, but not necessarily a lifelong aspiration to be a Marine. And so they're not quite sure how they're going to feel about that when they come into the organization. And I think many, if not most of them, are surprised at how closely that ethos of the Marine Corps mirrors their own ethos that led them to winning a professional audition. Those hours they spent practicing their instrument, honing their craft, taking auditions, developing ensemble experience. I mean, that requires just an incredible amount of dedication, and that's the kind of dedication the Marine Corps expects from all of its Marines. So it really is a much more natural fit than I think a lot of people might realize.
When you get to the end of a concert, whether it's with the Orchestra of Northern New York or the Marine Corps Band, do you hope that the audience has noticed anything about the work that the conductor has done? Well,
you're probably going to get different answers from different conductors about that. I consider myself to be a conduit from the ensemble to the audience and feel like if I'm doing my job well, I shouldn't really be that noticed. The only instrument that makes no sound on the stage is the conductor's baton. And my goal as a conductor is to make it as easy as possible for all of these consummate musicians. And believe me, the Orchestra of Northern New York has many, many consummate musicians, just fantastically talented people. I want to make it as easy as possible for them to sound great. As I was talking about, my goal with Beyoncé was to, or the artists that we had at the White House was to make them feel comfortable and confident. And that's exactly what I try to do with all the musicians that I work with as a conductor. Maybe not all conductors feel that way, but, I think because I started out as a player, I really always appreciated those conductors that made me feel confident and prepared. And so I thought, well, if I try to do that as a conductor, I know I will at least please musicians like me who are looking for that.
Are you happy to be back in Vermont?
Oh, thrilled to be back. We are just delighted. We moved back full-time in 2022. We have a place in the Champlain Islands on North Hero with a beautiful view of the Green Mountains. So we get sunrises over the Green Mountains over Lake Champlain every morning. So it's just idyllic. We're thrilled to be back.
Well, Mike Colburn, congratulations. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mitch. I appreciate it.
Mike Colburn is the new music director and conductor of the Orchestra of Northern New York, ONNY, succeeding Ken Andrews, who had served in that role since the orchestra was founded in 1988. There's a link to more about Mike Colburn at ncpr.org/northwards. Now I will pass the virtual baton to Ethan Shanty to tell us how this show comes together every week.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.